All right. Welcome to another episode of the I Tried to Be Straight
podcast
with Nate and
Susie.
And we are really excited to be here. And I realize I say we have a really special guest like every time, but that's because I really do mean it every time, because this guest is actually incredibly special, has written an amazing book, has written a second amazing book that is going to come out soon, which we're going to be talking about as well. But yeah, we're going to have her on here in a second. But first I want to say, Susie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. The sun is out, had a good workout session. I'm going to a climbing gym and I went this morning and it literally was like a scene of the L Word coming in. I was like all the chicks. It was like so fun.
I love that
so yeah,
for
it's
you.
great. But I wanted to ask you a question.
Yeah.
What is the weirdest thing that you've seen on TikTok this week?
I don't know. No, the weirdest thing I've seen is not on TikTok. It's the Shrek stuff you keep sending me.
Okay.
The weird Shrek with abs stuff. And I just don't understand it and I don't like it. And it's just my childhood is just being destroyed by you guys and all your weird Shrek memes. And can that stop?
AI generated Shrek
content.
He's just ripped and he's like either a cowboy or he's like, I don't know. I just think it's funny. It's a good time. Maybe.
So that's the worst thing I've seen.
Loosen up.
Well, that's enough for riffing. I don't think anything else to say for yourself. I killed it with the Shrek. Well, without further ado, our guest is right here. Could we hear a little bit about your story, get a little bit of your intro, and tell us a little bit about your book and your upcoming book?
Hi, my name is Brit Barron. And before I get too deep into anything else, I would just like to say that right before I got on this, I watched a TikTok of someone's parrot responding to the Kendrick Lamar diss track. And they were and they were playing the Kendrick Lamar track, and the bird was like, "Whoa, whoa!" I was like, "That is incredible." So I really just had to share that. Aside from professionally watching TikToks, I am an author, a speaker. I do all kinds of random things like a good millennial, but really just storytelling around gender, race, sexuality, spirituality, and a lot of my life has sort of revolved around those ideas and the experiences that come out of my own life. Similar to probably a lot of your audience, and you guys grew up deeply evangelical, and that has sort of been like a journey of figuring out what that looks like, you know, post coming out, what that looks like in an integrated way, what that looks like deconstructed, reconstructed, all of those things that we find ourselves in, what role that plays in my life. So I talk and write. The short version of the story, which my first book is a lot about, was just the experience of growing up evangelical. And then at 26, I became a pastor at an evangelical megachurch. And then I was still, I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but it wasn't like I was in the closet. Like I didn't even know I was gay. Like I was
totally
like so disembodied, which is like a big byproduct of evangelicalism, is like you don't think about your own body. Like you're not living in an embodied experience. So it wasn't even like I was like every day I was like, I'm gay, I just have to try to not be. I literally was like, you know, I'm just like doing me. And so I met my now wife, who was the creative director of at the megachurch. I don't know the numbers exactly, but how many creative directors at megachurches aren't gay? Okay, I would really bet my hat to say we are batting 1,000 there, you know? It's like the one cool girl that comes in with like a beanie and like a carabiner, and I'm like, okay, you guys, all of the digital marketing is queer. So
that's awesome.
A lot of that journey of just being like, oh, once I discovered that true thing about myself, but that thing about myself bumped up against like this community and this life that I had formed. And so the crux of it all really came down to, am I going to allow like the expectations of this broader community that I've built a life in, or am I going to be true to what I want in the life that I want to create? And I know, I mean, you guys, we all have, like so many of us have just lived in that tension of feeling like we have to choose our faith or our sexuality, or we have to choose, you know, and in very practical terms, I did have to choose like my job, you know, or my sexuality, or like, you know, my community, or these things. So I wrote a lot about that in my first book, and just that story of what that felt like and what that was like, and ultimately realizing that it is worth it to no matter how many people feel disappointed, they're disappointed only because they're carrying expectations that aren't true of you. Since then, I've just been thinking a lot and living a lot and existing in the world. And I'd love to talk to you more about this and get your thoughts and have a great conversation. But since then, I've been thinking a lot. And my next book is a lot about what we do with people in our life who disappoint us. So what do we do with the people who we love deeply, but also experience deep disappointment in, right? The grandmas who picked us up every day after school and made us spaghetti on Christmas and did all these things. And now they exist, and their homophobia, sort of knocks up against our queer identity. Does all the nice things that we love about them not, disregard the homophobia? Does the homophobia disregard everything? How do we live in this actual really nuanced tension between people who disagree with us, people who are on the other side of the line? And then for a lot of people like us, I'm like, what do we do with the fact that I can look at these evangelical churches and be like, these are antiquated, idiotic people. Or I'm like, is that just me 15 years ago? There's...
Right.
And so how do we deal with the nuance of the fact that we're always evolving and the people who we love may not be doing that at the same pace? And how do we reconcile that, right? I don't think cancel culture or things like that give us enough room to experience the humanity that's for us in that. So that's what I've been thinking a lot about lately, and that's what the new book's about.
That's awesome.
Wow.
Just to jump back to 2020 when your first book released, which for our listeners, it's titled Worth It. And it is not
so
to be
good.
cheesy, but it's worth the read. It's
It
really
really
worth
is.
it.
It really is. It's fantastic.
It's a great book, and I picked it up when I was first struggling with my sexuality, and I just have to tell you, Britt, thank you so much for writing it, putting it out there, putting yourself out there. It's so interesting how when you're in the church and you're feeling this uneasiness of your sexuality, you feel like you're the only one out there. I'm the only Christian who's ever experienced this. But reading your book puts so many things into perspective for me in terms of, man, Britt is trailblazing right now. That's what it felt like. It just is feels like such a revolutionary book that you wrote. And it really shifted some stuff in my spiritual walk and in myself. And so I'm just super thankful, and I'm getting a little shaky voice because I remember reading your book and just feeling so seen in the middle of that time when it was really hard to really come face to face with myself. But to jump even further back from 2020, just want to ask you another question. If you could paint a picture for our audience, what did it look like having dinner at your dinner table? What were the smells? Who was around? What did that look like? I just want people to really get a sense of how you grew up and what context and how that was like.
Yeah. All the way back, as a kid and...
Yeah.
2 years old.
Yeah. All right. Well, we start the story.
First memories.
Well, I always like to say that I kind of grew up in mainstream evangelicalism. My parents both became Christians. They grew up loosely religious, and they both became born again evangelicals. In their 20s and 30s once they started having kids. And so I grew up very much in the most pop culture brand of evangelicalism possible.
Awesome.
Lasers, fog machines.
Why not?
The gospel.
What else can we put on there?
Exactly, DC
Bible
talk and exactly.
Ooh, love it.
And so actually, my dad originally worked in aerospace engineering, and when I was in middle school, he felt called to ministry, and so we literally picked everything up. We moved to Colorado, and my dad was the vice president of Promise Keepers. I don't know if you guys...
Yeah.
Promise Keepers. Hell yeah.
Yeah. So that was big because that was now I'm effectively not a PK, but a ministry kid, and...
Absolutely.
Even more so, a super PK.
Yes, literally. So our whole life started to revolve around church and spirituality and God in a way where it had been a little bit looser up until that point. I felt a lot of comfort in that. I can remember just feeling I am so glad that my parents are who they are. I'm so glad my parents are Christian, and I'm so glad that I get to already have it figured out. And I'm so glad that at the ripe age of 8, I accepted Jesus Christ in my heart, and now I don't have to worry about a thing. I truly
wow.
I felt like that when I was younger, and just in high school, and Even I went to a Christian college, and I remember thinking like, oh, I'm so glad I'm I'm over here on this side of the line. How lucky
Perfect
am
little
I?
world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Truly.
I can so relate. Yes,
Yeah.
everything's just exactly how it should be. Nothing's questioned. It all just makes sense.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, lucky for us.
So then you went into skipping through middle school, high school. You went to college at a Christian church or a Christian university.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where you met a lot of your community, right?
Yeah, I went to a Christian college that I won't even give it airtime because I'm like, please let it fail and fall to the ground. But
Oh no!
I went to the
I'm
University
curious, but I won't ask.
University of Voldemort.
Oh no, I did
No,
that
I'm just
too. We
kidding.
were just talking about. Mine was actually a supernatural school. So like that's actually real life. People called it the Harry Potter school, the one I went to. So I'm curious as to, you didn't go to the one I went to though, right?
No. I went to APU. I'm
Okay,
just kinda
okay,
kidding.
I've heard of that.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Yeah, no, it was
witchcraft.
Yeah, no witchcraft and wizardry, unfortunately, but it was very Christian. And this is where like I started to have these moments where people would like, prophesy over me that I was like meant to be in ministry and meant to be a pastor and meant to do all these things, which already as a woman was like, we're already kind of bumping up against some things. My parents were very much like, that's hogwash. Like they're very,
Awesome.
yeah, like great in that way. And so, and honestly, at a Christian college, like if you like talking, they're like, you are called to be a pastor. I'm like, I'm really just chatty. Like that was like, I don't know if it was a spiritual gift, but I just wouldn't stop talking. And people were like, yeah, you have a call on
Yep.
your life. Yeah. And
That's
I'm like, oh,
that's
wow.
my whole family. It's like you can't help yourself.
Yeah. I'm like,
It's
I'm just
a
like,
calling or extroversion.
exactly. I'm like, I don't know. I might just be like annoyingly chatty. And so that's what like led me to think like, oh, maybe I could do this. Like I remember being in college and being like, okay, what's my dream? Like I'm going to be like a Christian like speaker and I'm going to, talk to people and I'm going to like, win people to Christ. And so that like shaped a lot of what I would go on to do. And it was kind of funny because I did end up being a pastor at this megachurch at 26, which was like such a big deal to be like this woman and a woman of color and to be like at this very big church and to be like preaching. But then that's also where I was like, so yeah.
Wait, if I could, had you been dating many guys around then, or were you kind of just like, I'll just save that till I'm done with my career?
Yeah, no, I had been dating guys, and it's like, I mean, I grew up in the best. There's no easier like way of life to be closeted in than purity culture,
Right.
Because you're like, no, I want to. It's just God said we shouldn't. Yeah, so, other than that, I'm super into. Yeah, I'm super into it.
Did you actually? Wait, did you actually tell any guys that? Be honest with me. Did you tell any guys?
Every boyfriend I ever had, I'd be like,
Wait, you said?
yeah, I'd be like, no, because I want to, but
The Lord.
an audience
has
of
bigger
one,
things.
Exactly.
Bigger plans for me. I can't I don't got time for this.
I'm not going to compromise my call.
That's just not my ministry.
Oh my God.
For
I can
this.
relate so hard. It's like, I just, God's got bigger things for me. I don't have time for that, It makes it so easy. Purity culture is just like, well, we can't, kiss or hold hands until we're pretty serious. So,
Yeah.
and we're not going to get pretty serious, let's be honest, because God has bigger plans for me.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's also a reason though that I didn't even know about my own sexuality. Because I literally thought like, oh, I'm just good. I'm just super holy. Like, I just haven't, because all my friends would be like, I mean, everyone was having sex, and so like, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe you're still doing it. I'm like, yeah, I signed the pledge card. I meant it. Like I'm
I
in
actually
it.
kissed dating goodbye.
Yeah,
asshole.
I did. Okay.
I really did it.
I listened to what they were saying, and I was like, yeah, I am just like so good. I'm just such a good person, Christian.
So
I see.
what were your thoughts when you laid eyes on your now wife?
Oh, I joke all the time that I'm like, almost immediately I was like, I get it. like, I get why people want to make it. I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm not a good person. I was just looking at the wrong people.
All those holiness points down the drain. You were so
Yes.
hard.
But it
All
was
that treasure in heaven.
all like wasted. Okay,
It was fake.
I'm gonna get up there and live in a shack at this point. It was just so weird because, you know, we met and because I was running the college ministry, she wanted to volunteer. So I was like, okay, let's just connect before and see, you know, if this is a good fit, whatever. And we ended up talking for 4 hours at this coffee shop, and there was just like such an instant, like, just like tangible connection in just like such a strange way that neither of us could figure out at the time. And then like a week later, maybe into being friends, we're already like best friends. I'm like, wow, this is my best friend. Like, we've known each other for a week, and Sammy was like, that's my wife's name. She was like, okay, this might sound crazy, but like, I feel like you're gonna be in my wedding. Like, and I'm just like, yeah, like we were locked in, okay?
Wow,
Did not know I would be the bride. So
I feel that too.
yeah, I know.
Weird.
It was so wild. And then, you know, classic lesbian fashion, I mean, it's like a month and a half later, I'm like, I love you. You know, she'd be like, I love you too. But we're also like, oh my God, like, are we gay? Like, it was just all so much like happening at the same
so
time.
much. 'Cause
Yeah.
you weren't even sure, and I read your book, but like, you weren't even sure if you were kind of figuring that piece out still, right? Like, is it okay or not?
Yeah, I mean, after, like, we had this beautiful moment, and this is what's hard, I think, about especially having these two seemingly opposing things. It's like, falling in love with Sammy was truly the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced in my entire life. But the fact that it was such a painful experience at the same time, because it felt like, if this beautiful thing is true, then nothing over here that I've held my whole life is true. And that's extremely painful. So it's like the most beautiful thing in my entire life came at like a very real, and at the time, like, just gut-wrenching cost. So I struggled a lot with, and I'm not even joking, I went to my therapist because I had this like budding ministry career. I'm like on the, you know, we're at the fastest growing church in America, which is what every megachurch pastor says about their church. And and then I remember being in my therapist's office, and like, I can't even believe I remember this, but it's just like so hard to even remember those feelings. But I said, my ministry is taking off, and so I don't know if this is something, if this is a test, like, is this a temptation coming to see if I'll like lose track of the call on my life, or is this actually what I think it is, you know, which is this like beautiful experience of love. And that's like heavy. Like, honestly, when you were just saying like you felt so alone, like when you were coming out with this, I'm like, yeah, like those are questions like I sat and wrestled with, and like, I mean, it's just so heavy in the moment to be like, not me not being able to tell if something is true love or a temptation from the devil. I'm like, what is happening? Like, where am I? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what's my life going to be about? What is all the comfort and security that I had felt my whole life? Like, that was what was on the table. For something that I had heard and had such a narrative around was wrong, but I'm experiencing and feels so pure and good and true. So, I mean, it was like, what a nightmare to just like, you know what I mean? You're trying to untie this knot that is like, I mean, 50 layers deep.
Yeah. How do you even begin to untie that?
Well, and this is to my wife's credit, like after like the first time we were like, oh my gosh, like we are falling for each other. Like she was like, we need to go to therapy. And so we literally did. Like, we had this really awesome therapist that for the next like 3 years, we both met with together and individually. And she really was one of the main people that helped me sort of like untie that. Cause also like it was a secret. So it's not even like I could process it. Like it was like suffocating because I'm like holding it and it's just so overwhelming, and it's not like I could have talked to my friends about it or my mentors or my boss. Like it's just, and like no one can know that I'm like dealing with the heaviest thing I've ever experienced in my life while I just continue on every day. And also I'm falling in love with this person. You know what I mean? Like it was
Yeah.
wildly overwhelming.
Yeah.
I often feel like in hiding there is more, I mean, everybody I feel has experienced this, but when you hide, there's just more shame. Like it gets amplified when you're like thinking in a vacuum. And so like going to a therapist or like talking about it with a friend, it just like takes power away from it. And then we were just talking about this with my sister, but the idea of like coming out to somebody who's not Christian or who's not in this like Christian bubble, and their reaction to saying I'm gay is so like nonchalant. It almost is like, oh, like what am I dying over here for?
All that drama for nothing.
Yeah.
Literally, they're like, okay, and I'm like, and?
Yeah.
No,
I'm going to hell.
No, this is bad. Freak out at me. Freak out, please.
Like, am
All
I
this hype
going
for
to hell?
nothing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell me something. I know it's funny because like that is the time in your life where you need people more than anything. But when you've established your whole life around the church, everybody in your corner is also potentially gonna be, attacking you, and at the same time is trying to help you. So you're literally the most isolated. I think having a therapist was genius. Like,
Yeah.
baller move, because that probably saved, your future marriage, because you weren't, a lot of people just get so isolated in this process because it's impossible not to, especially if you work for the church. So I love that part of your story. I love that you had that. So then you kind of processed through that with your therapist. You worked on that with each other, and then you kind of started eventually telling other people. Yeah.
Yeah. Once I feel like we were individually, and I was individually able to come to a place that I was like, this is good. And I'm like learning to love this about me. Like, and there's like stages to like queerness. Like I remember saying like, I'm not a lesbian. I just like love Sammy. You know what I mean? And now I'm like, oh my God, I'm a lesbian. Like nothing has ever been more true.
Yeah.
But you know what I
Straight
mean?
with the side of Sammy.
Yeah, literally. But it comes like in waves of this like developmental experience. And so at the time that I realized like what I'm experiencing with her and this like connection and this love and this ability, like it is truly worth everything that I thought might happen. And I talk about this in the book Worth It. I'm like, every single thing that I was afraid of happening did. So it's, they weren't like I was making up these fake monsters. It's like, yeah, we lost our job, our community, people said weird things about us, people said weird things to my parents, we got bad messages on the internet, we lost some friends, we made some friends, like all the things that I thought were up on the table turned out to be actually up on the table. And still it's the best thing I've ever done. And that's where, which is what felt like the question. Do I want to live the rest of my life based on the expectations of the people around me? Or do I want to live the rest of my life based on me living my life and what feels true to me? And even spiritually, in terms of faith sense, I feel like I was able to arrive very soon to a reality where I was like, I don't think that it's God's voice. But I am hearing a lot of voices. And these are people who claim to be people of God, or who, you know what I mean? But in terms of like my own feeling about that, like that was the quickest thing to change. And I was like, oh, I don't think I'm going to be damned to hell for the rest of my life. And then I was like, is there a hell? And then, that's a whole nother thing. But then I thought like, oh, but the people's response is what I'm maybe more afraid of. Right.
Yeah.
I didn't think I was disappointing God, but I'm like, but disappointing all these people, or like feeling their expectations not being met. I was like, that's very scary. And it was, but ultimately I would do it again.
Could you speak to that piece? Because I think a lot of our audience right now is wrestling with that pull of, I feel like this is what my faith community is saying, and this is what I feel from God, which is opposing, and this is how I really feel inside. And so I imagine there have been thousands, hundreds of people who've messaged you and been like, hey, Britt, I'm going through this. Like, I don't know what to do. Could you speak to what's the cost? What's on the line for someone who decides to stay closeted and deny who they are?
Well, I mean, if you've experienced that in any way, you know what the cost is. I think we've all experienced that, and what's hard is sometimes we choose like a pain that we know for like a potential freedom that we don't know, and because we know one, right? Like I'm like, okay, like this sucks, and I kind of hate this, and every day a little bit I like am just at the edge of a breakdown, but like I know what this feels like. And I remember being in that place too, where I'm like, oh, I know what it feels like to sneak around. I know what it feels like to be in hiding. And you do that for long enough, and you're like, well, it's certain, because I know what it is. And I feel like a lot of the people I've talked to be completely honest, there are some people who are like, I'm not sure what God thinks about this, but a lot of people who grew up religious and have had any kind of true spiritual connection, because I'm like, yeah, I can, I'll shit on the lasers and the fog machines, but at the same time, I'm like, I have had some encounters and moments where I'm like, that felt real to me. Like, that just felt really real to me, and I'm taking that with me, and I'm leaving everything else behind. But I do feel like there is a connection to that, and that was, I just feel like we it's so hard to trust ourselves and to trust that connection that it is going to lead to something. I used to describe it, I'm like, I'm standing on the edge of a cliff, and every day it's like the wind's blowing, I have no shelter, it's raining on me, like all these things are happening, and I know that this isn't the edge. And if I jump into this water, I know that there is an island with like blue skies, good temperature, no rain, but like I know that I could stand here and brace myself, but I don't know if I could make the swim over to there. And like, that's what it felt like. Like, I'll choose this. I know this is terrible. Like, it was so awful being closeted and secret and having this double life and doing all these things, but it was familiar. Like, it became real familiar real quick. And I think that is, some people don't know if they will make it to the thing, but I don't think most people realize how much they've already made it through. And I'm like, oh, if you've already done that, baby, like you can absolutely make that swim, make that journey over. Like, you will be okay, because you've already become comfortable with so much.
I think a lot of us are stronger than we think, and in this journey we face so much adversity. It's just quiet, under the radar. We hear things, we feel things, but we just don't talk about it. The actual confrontation of it is so scary that, we are stronger than we think. We are strong enough to fight this. Almost all of us are, but the fear feels so big, I think that's part of the reason that your book is so powerful. It's talking about why we fight through it, and well, it's worth it. It's worth getting over that. I think it's really interesting how you came to the realization that you felt like God wasn't against this, because I think for me, I fused like God's voice with the church's voice, with the evangelical Christian's voice. And it was hard to step out of everything that I knew and was raised in, because it all kind of was one package deal, right? And I was more of a follower than a leader. I'm like not naturally one to challenge. And so I really love that you were able to separate it really well and be like, okay, this is what I feel about God. This is what I feel like from people, weighing them both out and making the choice that it was right for you to, express this love you had for this woman, this pure, just couldn't force it love. You weren't trying to make this thing happen. It just literally happened, because that's how love works.
Truly.
You fell in love with her heart too. You weren't even physical. You were in love with her before you ever like kissed or anything. Like, that's saying something. Those kind of stories, like it's so pure and beautiful. What I just want to say is, like, I love that element of your story. I think it's really beautiful how you were able to sort where your heart was at really fast, and what like, I don't feel like your relationship with God even skipped a beat, did it? It doesn't seem like it skipped much of one, if it did.
My like, initially, and when the book first came out and all these things, I would get a lot of questions, even when I first came out, of like, what's your relationship like with God? And I had the same answer then that I have now, which is, it just became so much less fragile. Because when I stood back and distilled, okay, what are actual moments that I feel like I had with God outside of like people, or like someone telling me this is the call on your life, or someone telling me this means, or someone, but just the moments where it was like, I just feel like I had some kind of connection. It never felt scary. It never felt mean. It never felt judgmental. Like it has never felt like that. And sort of going through and picking these times of like, well, why do I feel so scared? Well, why do I feel these things? Like, yeah, it's all these people, you know, who are telling me these things, and I'm like, but if I really am able to like sort of step back, I'm like, that's never been my experience. That's never been my experience of God. That's been my experience of you guys. That's been my experience of the culture. That's been my experience of church, you know, and I think for my own sanity, that was something I needed to keep, right? Because I couldn't fathom losing my community and friends and family and that connection, you know. So part of it maybe was just like my own psyche, like just, you know what I mean, like doing what it needed to do for psychological safety. But it, you know, it just felt so special, and has since felt so special, that I'm like, oh no, there's nothing. What would Dr. Dobson have to say that would change an experience I had in a quiet moment? Like what? There's, you know what I mean? Like I'm the only one who has that. And what I know is that I've never had a scary encounter. I've never had a mean, or like, it has felt the same way it felt loving Sammy. Like it feels open, it feels safe, it feels comfortable, it feels good. And so people want to like send me random Bible verses or all these things. I'm like, it doesn't matter to me. I know what I know. And I'm gonna go with that.
What do you hear God saying about your queerness now, like in your quiet time?
Something that I have come to know is like I'm learning to experience like God's voice in understanding that like we are all created in God's image, which means there is like divinity in all of us. And so distilling and finding those things inside of us is a way of connecting to that, right? Which is very different from when I was younger, which I was like, you know, I'd be like, what are you saying? You know, coming in. But something that I feel like I have experienced, and I would say like this has like been a gift from God, is realizing that maybe the biggest gift in my entire life is my queerness. Because my queerness has opened up the reality that things that I thought were concrete are not. Things that I thought were absolutes are not. Things that I thought had to be a certain way did not. And so having this whole idea and being like, this is how family and marriage, this is what all these things look like, and being able to like be queer and sort of expand that has allowed me to do that everywhere, like in everything in my life, in the way I think about God, in the way I think about spirituality, in the way I think about business, in the way I think about friendship, in the way I think about life, in the way I think about economics. Everything I've been like, oh, however people say it is this way because it has to be this way, that's not real. And I only know that because I was able to experience that through my queer identity. When people say this is the way this is, I'm like, absolutely not. And I know that to be true because I've experienced that. And so I feel like God, it has been a gift from God to experience my queerness and let my queerness impact every part of my life, and not feel like it's this shy, sad part of me of like, oh, I'm all these things, but I'm queer. Now I'm like, oh my gosh, the best thing that ever happened to me, the biggest gift of my life, my queer identity has like found its way into every corner of my life, specifically even my relationship with God, even my spirituality. I'm like, it's wide open. It's like, it is so beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. I think as a pastor's kid as well, I know exactly what you're saying with how earlier you were talking about how your world was all like inside this bubble. It all made sense. It felt so cozy and perfect. And now, because you were queer, now your bubble is kind of gone and you are just open and seeing things as what they are, and you're not having all these preconceived notions, and you don't think you know everything, and you know there's things you're still learning. And that's kind of owed in part to your queerness, even like to our listeners that are listening to this right now, like just knowing that like that can be on the other side of this. For anyone that's still like in the closet, like you can get to the point where you're actually really happy you are the way you are. like that can be on the other side of your story. That's not even super far away or unattainable. Like it can be so scary in the moment, but like there is a world where you're actually thankful for this. And I would say I'm getting there, and I'm sure you're probably, like that's really beautiful. I absolutely love that part of your story.
Yeah. So how do you get to that part of being grateful for your queerness, the way that God made you, when you have people kind of coming at you at all sides, opposing you, sending you the Jackie Hill Perry videos?
Oh my.
You've never gotten those, have you?
I want to write a book called Good Girl, Gay God. And I want...
Can I pre-order that now?
Yeah,
before
if
you write
you're
that?
listening, publishers, yeah.
Yeah, so how do you get there? And I mean, this kind of goes into your new book too, like when it's grandma giving you the call and saying, hey, like, here's what I think about your lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, and I wish I had like here's like 3 things. I think one huge thing that I always say, like I was on a podcast one time and they asked, if you could have, you had a magical wand and you could bop every single person on the head and they would know one thing. I said, which is true, I would have everyone trust themselves. I would just say, trust yourself.
That's good.
We grow up, we have all existed in a society that so values external authority, okay? We're always looking for it. We're like, okay, I literally joke all the time that all my friends left the church, but Brene Brown is their new pastor. I'm like, you know what I mean? Like, and that's not bad. Like okay, shout out to you. Like, you know what I mean? Glenn and Brene.
No, but I have that. That's me.
Yes. And I'm like, these aren't bad voices at all. Like, she's doing great work. But it's like, okay, this person wasn't saying the thing I needed to know about myself. I need to go to this person can say it about myself, or maybe, and then, you know, she says something that people don't like, and like, okay, who's my new external authority? Where is my new external authority? And the reality is the parts to get to the place where you're like, oh, I love this. I love my queer. I celebrate my queer identity. Like, when me and Sammy first got together, we were like, we're not going to be like those gays, like those lesbians where our whole life is. And now we're like, all Pride Month, like glitter awesome. Rainbows like coming out of my eyeballs. Like, it's just as like, we're so into it. And all of that. I mean, I think there are so many good books and there are good resources and all that stuff, but I'm like, when I watch a Jackie Hill Perry video, to be completely honest, I feel sad. I'm like, oh, no. And so if you're going to send me that, I'm like, you want me to be sad? I don't want me to be sad. And I'm not going to do that. And I'm at a point in my life, which is like, no one's voice matters more than mine. And my understanding of my own dignity. And I don't know if are you guys Drag Race fans?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, at the end of every episode, you know, RuPaul says, if you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love somebody else? And I used to think like, oh, my voice is the most important one. Like, I'm a bad person. Like, I used to equate that of like, but now I'm like, oh my gosh, the only possible way that I can look at grandma, cousin, uncle, person who's saying these, and I can find their dignity and their nuance is because I can hold my own dignity and nuance. The problem is if I'm trying to go around saying like, okay, well, once everyone's happy with me, I'll be happy with me. And it's just not, that's just unrealistic, right? But if you are truly happy with you and you say, what I know to be true is that I don't want to hide. What I know to be true is that I'm queer. What I know to be true is that I have value. What I know to be true is that I was born good and I can choose that goodness. What I know to be true is that I have so much nuance. I remember feeling safe in the bubble, and I remember the bubble bursting, and I remember what it felt like. Yeah, that's true about me too. And if I can just hold and celebrate that, then I can look at the people who I love who are calling me or sending me these videos and be like, listen, I understand you have nuance and you're doing all these things and you have dignity and you were born good and you can choose that. But what I already know isn't on for table, on the table. People used to send me a lot of messages, they don't anymore, that's like, how do you justify your faith and your sexuality? And I would always respond, to who? I don't. I what? And there's, in just to get into some theology for a minute, I think Black liberation theology has a lot to teach us about authority and internal authority and external authority. Like Jesus's life was all to say, oh, all of this external authority that you guys think these rabbis and teachers of the law have, like they don't. If you want to heal on the Sabbath, do it. No one's asking for permission. And it's a big mental shift, but every single person in history in my life that I admire, I'm like, do you think Harriet Tubman went to the local authorities and was like, excuse me, could I possibly get a permit to walk some people to freedom? It's like, if there is something that you see and you want, like you cannot wait for someone else's authority to give it to you. You'll never get it. But when you take on that authority for yourself, then you get to live it out a reality where everyone has dignity, everyone has nuance. It's not reflective of who you are, and then you can engage with those people.
That's so good, because I think I've noticed that church culture often is so much about authority, but then who are we really following? Like, we're following this pastor who's doing this thing. Great ideas, but like we often, I think, probably give up our own autonomy and stop trying to think for ourselves in that process. And it's like, well, did God tell you to listen to this pastor of this city? Or did he tell you to listen to him and his heart? Like, if you totally shut off your own, authority, like your own heart and your own mind, like, is that what God would want? Would God just want you to live your whole life based on what the person in charge of you is telling you to do? I think you dealt with that a lot as a pastor. Like, you've been on both sides of that. Yeah.
And so I'm still a pastor now. At like a quirky little church in LA.
Heck yeah. Which one? That's what I'm going to say.
Yeah, it's called New Abbey, and it is so fun and delightful. But something we say all the time is that we're like, we are the people who have created time and put an energy into creating a conversation. But just because we're like up here with a microphone doesn't mean that we have any stronger connection to God than anyone else in this room. And we have to work extra hard, and we try to be like, we're not different from you. We just decided to be like, okay, I'm going to, take some time this week to craft a conversation that we can all engage in. Like at our church, we spend like half the time in like conversation with people around us, because we're like, this is where the magic happens, and I feel like we have so much baggage of being like, okay, I just need this kind of validation, and then I can love myself. And the reality is like, we get to experience the world from a place of healing and transformation when we've given that to ourselves, when we've allowed ourselves to feel it. And so getting to a place where you celebrate all of who you are, like no one could, even if people are saying the nicest things about you, it only becomes true when you believe it about yourself. So I think the internal work, I think, is, again, just like woefully underrated. And at the end of the day, like, we are made in the image of God. Like, we are created in that image. And so we are carriers of that image. And our work to understand that more, it starts with figuring that out and going and be like, oh, what image do I carry? What does that mean? Okay, well, I'm a queer person and I'm carrying this identity. How does that suit me? And one thing we say all the time at our church to our trans and non-binary friends who go to our church, we're like, we want to make it very clear, like, you're not just welcome here. We really need you here, because you are helping our understanding expand of who God is, what God can do in the world, what God is doing. The story of who we think God is we need you, right? We need all these people to create the bigger story. And so it's not about welcoming these certain parts or tolerating our own queerness or tolerating these people or welcoming someone. It's about being like, oh, I need my queerness to understand how I am carrying this image. We need this kind of diversity in our communities. We need these conversations. We need these things to tell a bigger story of who God is.
Wow. You are the first pastor that I have ever heard vocalize the need for diversity in a church, which is crazy because I think Sunday mornings are still the most divided. Isn't it the most divided hour of the week?
Yeah.
And so that's That's crazy. I know we have a couple people. I know my friends in ministry listen to this podcast, and they often wonder, how do I even begin to make that space welcoming for people who are queer, people who are, Mexican. I'm Mexican, so I went to a mostly white church, and I didn't always feel very welcome. It was very interesting. But how do I make room for these people who grew up differently than me, who have experienced God differently than me? How does that happen at your church?
Yeah, good question. I'm Mexican too, by the way.
Latina.
Yeah, we got
Nice. I'm white.
Yeah,
We know.
Yeah, I wouldn't have guessed. You know what I mean? You never know.
Thank you.
Never know.
Thank you.
Oh, my wife is white. Like, and my wife is white. Like, she got sunburned in the car one time. I think it's a great question. And again, I feel like I wish I was giving different advice. I feel like a broken record, but I'm like, whenever I get this question a lot of like, how can we do this? I'm like, you have to first understand all the ways in which that's happening in yourself. So I think a lot of like, particularly in 2020, like every white person was like, I'm gonna make the most diverse, hires, and I'm anti-racist, and I'm like, and that's great, and that is, but when you haven't understood your own privilege, and then the way that plays out in the world, and then the way that allows you to act in the world, you can never figure out how to create a welcoming environment for folks who aren't coming from that same angle. Because sometimes what we want is the end result. We're like, oh, I just want like a really diverse church. But there's probably a reason it's not. And to have a truly diverse and welcoming church, like you have to understand your own social location. So, okay, let's say I'm a white man, cis man in my 30s, and I'm like, and I haven't thought about my own privilege and my own ways that I, exist in the world. And I'm just out there like, oh, come on. How come there's no, Asian people in my church? Like, this, so I would say to folks who are listening, who want that diversity, I think that's amazing. And I think it's something you can have, but you have to be very clear on where you would even sit in that community and how you exist. And from there, then you can communicate why it's important and why is it valuable to you. If it's just for pictures or photos, or if it's just to ruffle feathers with your, older congregants, then it's like, don't do that. Don't do that to the people coming, Be clear on why you want that and then how you sit in that community.
That's so good.
So good.
One of my biggest pet peeves is when a church does like stock image social media posts of like people that look different in age and color and like all the ways. And then you get there and you're like, what? I just got catfished by this.
Literally.
We would chase them around. I worked on the creative team, and we would chase the few people of color around and like get so photos of them in like every time we could. And it's like, that's not what our church looks like. Like we wish it looked like that, but you can't just chase them around like paparazzi.
As someone who was tokenized at a church, I want my royalties from all those images.
Honestly, no, I feel that way about like the college we went to. I'm like, me and my friends were on every poster. And I'm like, no, you're stalking us at this point. It's
and you're not even feeding me.
It's weird.
Okay. Yeah.
No, but I love this conversation because I often think that when we are going to a church that looks similar to us, we kind of get into this mindset that's what heaven is going to look like. When in reality, we're going to get to heaven and it's going to look so different in so many different ways. And to even begin to like break out of that mold of it, like I right now go to a church that is mostly white and affluent, and I sometimes get almost not the ick, but a little bit of the ick, like sitting there and I'm like, I just know that heaven is not going to look like this, and there's something in my spirit that like just wants something different. And still, like, I find it hard to find churches that are affirming and do look different and diverse. And so what would you say to somebody who is currently going to a church, to a queer person like me, who's currently going to a church that is maybe not affirming? What would you say to that?
Oh gosh, why?
Let it rip.
I just, I think there are different seasons, different times for different things. But I think the core question, the question behind the question is, why do we choose the communities that we do? And I think there are times, like there's this sociological construct that people need bonding circles and they need bridging circles. So you need, like, there's something about sitting in a room with just all other, like, people of color or queer people where I'm like, oh, okay, you know, or like a room full of women or something where you're just like, this is a bonding circle. Like, it feels safe. It feels good. Like, I can take a deep breath. And then there's bridging circles where it's like, okay, I'm going to talk to these white people and like, I'm stretching myself in this way, or like, you know, straight people, whatever it is. And so I think that those are both really important as we navigate our life and our times. But when it comes to a spiritual community, a church, a faith community, like, you really need to ask yourself what you want and what you deserve out of it. So this is like your third place. This is not work. This is not, you know, school. This is something where you're like, okay, I'm coming to this thing to whatever. And so if what you want out of that community isn't what that community has, I think you need to ask, like, is this a project I'm willing to take on? And what's the cost? And then if this isn't a place I can feel fully comfortable, then is it serving the purposes? And again, no church is perfect. Like, obviously people at our church like wish we had different things, and we meet in like an old smelly gym, and it's like, you know what I mean? That is what it is. So whatever, it's not perfect. But if it's core things like, I don't know if they're affirming, or I don't feel comfortable as a person of color, or there are things like that, then I think you need to reevaluate what you're looking for in a church community. And you know what I mean? Especially if you're someone who's wrestling with finding that value and celebrating your core identity. I think it can be pretty damaging to like be in those spaces.
Yeah, that's good, because I think sometimes I get in the mindset of like, I am sitting in this tension of being Christian and gay, and so like I'm like, I get to put myself in this tension all the time, and like you said, like that's probably sometimes like damaging to our psyche, to our spirit. That's really good.
Yeah, sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
I didn't want to steer away from this conversation, but I did want to talk about your upcoming book, and we don't have much more time, and we've already taken so much of your time, and I'm really enjoying this conversation. Like, I'm so thankful that you're here. But your next book is more about what we do with people that don't accept us. And I know that kind of like curtails towards the end of your story about, you know, after having come out and now having to deal with this side of it, which I think me and Susie can relate to. But before we close up, I wanted to hear just a little bit about how you deal with that and what your book goes into as far as that issue goes.
Yeah. No, you guys are great. I'm like, oh, I talk forever. The new book, I started writing it and conceptualizing it in 2021. And a lot of it came out of sort of the big experience we had in 2020. And then the conversation online really turned to like, whoa, you know, and overwhelmingly I got this sense that I'm like, you know, it's interesting. Something I talk about in the book that I call progressive amnesia is I'm like, there are so many times where I'm like, you learn something on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday you're like laughing at everyone who doesn't know it. And I think that's tough, because at the end of the day, you literally don't know what you don't know. So something I think about all the time is when I came out to my parents, I had been thinking about the fact that I was queer every single minute of every single day for 2 years before I told them. And I did have an expectation that I needed them to respond as if they had also been thinking about it every single minute of every single day for 2 years, when in reality, they were very surprised. They were extremely caught off guard, because no, they had not been thinking about it every single second of every single day for 2 years. And so I feel like we get into these situations online or with people we love, and we have to ask ourselves very real and hard questions about what do we do now in light that someone I love doesn't know something that is now very important to me. And so I talk about things like, I think obviously I'm a queer person, I'm a person of color, I'm a woman. I'm like, the evangelical church's obsession with like white supremacy and patriarchy and America's like indulgence in that and all of these things, I'm like, burn it to the ground. Burn it all to the freaking ground. Fight the power, absolutely. The work does not change. However, when I can be close to the version of myself that sat in those churches comfortably, the actual things that I thought in high school where I was like, oh, I'm so glad my parents are Christian. I'm so glad I was born in America so that I could be like in the good right side. Like, okay, like that was a real thing that I thought. These are all real things. Like, why don't gay people just be celibate? Like, I'm like literally like, I have experienced those and I know the comfort and security that exists in those spaces. So no, the work doesn't change. The work never changes, but I think our approach to the work changes when we can have empathy and love for that nuance in ourselves. Only then we'll be able to hold the nuance of the people around us. And then I think we'll be less likely to pull up someone's tweet from 10 years ago. And we'll be more likely to invite a journey of transformation that we've gone on. Like, it's just wild to me that I'm like, I used to think all these things, and then I got invited into this journey of transformation, and now my whole view is expanded. And then it needs to expand more, and people invite me into a journey of transformation. What happens sometimes, and you guys can probably relate to this, I have felt this at times, is instead of saying, like, I've experienced transformation, I want you to, I have experienced shame, and so what I want people to feel is shame. I talk about the pastor that I used to work for, and he is very much like quintessential, like, pop culture church, rides the line. Maybe it's affirming, maybe it's not. They'll never say publicly, but privately it's very unaffirming.
Yeah.
And I've always said, like, if he just wakes up one day and, like, becomes affirming, people will probably, like, celebrate him for that. Like, or he'll be like, oh, what a good thing, you know? And that bothers me. Because I'm like, at the end of the day, like, I want you to be affirming and welcoming, but literally I'm like, something in it bugs me. I'm like, no, I don't want you to wake up one day and get to be Mr. Affirming Cool Pastor. Like, I want you to feel shame. I want you to feel bad. I want you to wallow in depression. Okay. I want your friends to leave you, all your family to abandon you. And then you can be affirming. Okay. Because you don't just get to wake up and do it. But I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, Britt, get your life together. Like, that means that I'm still working through, like, what that felt like, and I'm okay with that. But I need to be realistic about that. I need to know when I am saying, like, I want you to feel shame because I feel shame, versus when I'm saying, okay, I want to invite you into transformation because I've gotten to experience transformation. And at the end of the day, we have all these people, and I feel like every comment section and everything is just like, oh, I'm hurting, I want you to hurt too. Like, let's go. And I don't know where that's going to get us.
How do you find closure, especially with those people? We've worked at churches as well, and there have been hurtful things said by leaders that I'm sure that they don't even, like, lose a minute of sleep thinking about it. However, it still keeps us up at night, or it's keeping somebody up at night right now that's listening. How do you move on without an apology? How do you find closure? How do you find healing?
Something I feel kind of passionate about, which at this point I'm like, I think I just feel passionate about everything. So something I think about.
I love that about you.
Yeah. Something I had this moment one time where I was like gonna preach a sermon, and it was on forgiveness, and I was like, this will be cool. And then it's my wife and her best friend, and they, like, both had this, like, weird visceral reaction, like, to me even saying that word, because they're like, well, do you think I need to, you know, have this conversation, forgive us, like, and I was like, oh my gosh, what have we done to that word that we think, like, forgiveness is, like, that I would have to go to my old boss's house and give him a hug and be like, hey man, like, I forgive you. And then it's a moment, and then it's over. When I'm like, the reality is there are people in our life who have hurt us in ways where I'm like, I'll never see you again. Like, you'll never see my face again. And that's okay. But personally, I think what's important for me to move on is forgiveness. And so I've started to see forgiveness less as a moment and understand it more as like an action verb, in the sense that like I'm like, every time I open myself up to the reality that people can change and grow is a little bit of me forgiving that situation. I think about my wife, who has like been hurt in different ways, and I'm like, her opening herself up to being loved and loving me is forgiveness for people she'll never see again. My openness to being a leader in a church again is part of me like forgiving those people. It's not about a conversation. Those apologies, 90% of us will never get. And whether or not those people change, our own act of forgiveness comes when we are able to not close ourselves off to the opportunities of like living like the things that our life is offering us, right? Being a pastor again, finding love again, trusting in these friendships again, finding leaders that I again can hold. Because one thing I probably did a lot is hold leaders to just such an unrealistic standard. And then they take one step out of it, and I'm like, wow, like, you are not the person I thought you are. When I'm like, oh, are you just a person? Like, you know what I mean? Like, Brene Brown is just a real girly. Like, she can do research and she can write these books.
Say that.
Maybe,
Don't say that.
But she is a regular girly, and I love that. I'm like, I want to be able to take things that people say, and all of these things to say when we've been hurt in any kind of way, our ability to be in a similar situation or to engage with these things or to be open to what life has for us, I think are the ways that we forgive. Because if we're waiting for apologies, we're never going to get them.
We're waiting forever. That's so beautiful. That's so great.
No, that's so huge. I feel like a lot of us coming out just kind of deserve to be really upset. And I never hold it against anybody, but what you're talking about, what you're speaking about, it's the best way for us to be happy and healthy on the other side. It's letting go of all the pain. It's not letting those people that hurt you for so long dictate how your life looks out like from here on out. Like, do you want them to still have a place in your life and hold you back from everything you're capable of? Like everything God has for you? No, I don't want that. I don't want anyone that's coming out to have that holding them back. Like, life can be so beautiful. Like, why waste a second of this new life we get to have on bitterness? Like, I ain't got time for that. I'm 33 already. Like, let's go. Let's live a beautiful, loving life without the like chains of resentment on us.
Absolutely. And to your point, to be clear, I think sometimes going through the anger is the only place you get there. Like, be mad. But that's not the final resting place. That's not where we're living. That's not where we're posting up. Like, be mad, baby, but like we're gonna live a life that we want to live. We're gonna live a beautiful life. Like, we're gonna get all the things. We're gonna like get so close to our own divinity and the divinity in every other human being. And you know what I mean? We are going to outgrow those people in very real ways. I don't even see that in like an arrogant way. I just mean like you will outgrow and expand how you see God, what God can do in the world, the transformation that's available to you, beyond all the voices that try to hold you back. But it's unfortunately like your work, our work. And it doesn't come from outside voices.
It's almost unfair that we have to do the work. Like, it's like, okay, we already went through so much, now we have to do work to get through this, and it's not fair, but it is worth it.
Okay.
Quote.
Exactly.
Okay. Book tag by Worth It.
We
it's
love
a fantastic
marketing.
book. But
I have one last question to wrap it up. I need the people to know why your nickname is Bean.
Ooh.
Oh yeah.
Like from Even Stevens? Is it like you're just like Even Stevens, you love bacon?
No, I am.
Sorry, that's an old quote.
I'm older than that guy. Okay, so wow. I was Beans before that Beans. But so funny thing is people are like, where this nickname come from? But it's almost not even a nickname. It's like my real name. My parent, like everyone in my life has only ever called me Beans. Like my parents, my siblings,
that's awesome.
Teachers, my wife, like at the altar said Beans. Like,
cute.
That is just so much my name. the story is when I was born, my sister was only 3. And so my full name, my real name is Brittany, and I guess she couldn't say it, so it sounded more like Beanie. And so it was like Beanie Baby, and then it shortened to Beans, and it just like, literally, I'm 38 years old, and no one calls me anything but Beans. So now I'm like, should I just change it? Should I just legally change it? But that's too much paperwork.
Put on the book.
Yeah.
On the book.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll grab some Sharpies and just scratch Beans Barron.
Yeah. Well, then when I was like writing a book and stuff, and they were like, "What? You need a name, like a real name." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, I could go by Britt."
Well, Beans, where can people find you on social media? Could you plug your published date for your new book as well?
Yes, and the title.
The book comes out October 1st. The title is "Do You Still Talk to Grandma When the Problematic People in Our Lives Are the Ones We Love?"
That's so good.
That's so good.
It comes out October 1st. You can find me on the internet at BritBarron.com, which is 1 T and 2 R's, or on Instagram at Brit Barron. And that is basically the only places I am. I haven't joined the Twitter X force.
Yeah, me
Twitter
either.
X verse.
Yeah.
Musk verse.
Yeah.
Before we go out, well, is there anything else you want to say? And also, I think if there was something you had for anyone that might be in the closet or like going through a rough time, just like a quick like word of encouragement for them.
Honestly, if you are listening to this and you are like drowning in all of the questions and you don't know what to do, you're not alone. You are not alone. And I think if you need to stay in the closet for a little longer and figure it out, it's okay. You're good. And whenever you're ready, people will be ready.
I really have enjoyed this conversation so much. The way you've walked through this all, you're still a pastor. Like, I love that. Thank you for honoring us with your time. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
To any of our listeners who are in LA, please check out, what is it called again?
New Abbey.
New Abbey. Love that name.
I wish I was just in LA last year. And I'm like, how did I not know? I was like 10 minutes from there. I'm so sad now.
Yeah.
But I'm going to show up there someday. Check out that church.
Yeah.
Thank you again. And I guess I need to actually close this out because I could just keep. What else are we talking about? LA weather. How's that going? Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for bringing a little LA coolness to our little Sacramento less cool world. we strive to be you, and someday maybe we will
never be.
We will never be you. Thank you for being here, and I guess that's it for this episode of the I Tried to Be Straight
podcast. I don't know that we're doing that now.
I'm doing that today.
I'll do it. I'm in.
We're doing it.
I'm in.
Podcast. But